Today you are living the life of a Song Dynasty Coroner, a lifetime spent as neighbor to the dead, speaking for wronged souls, and yet branded by townsfolk as an unclean man of a base profession. I was born outside Bianjing during the northern Song to a household of coroners. My father practiced the trade, as his father had. White funeral cloth hung from our eaves, and passing villagers always swung a few paces wide of our door. My mother died young. My father was constantly summoned out by the county yamen in the dead of night. The stove sat cold, and I kept watch over a single oil lamp, falling asleep to the night watchman's wooden clapper outside. Children my age played in the dust and kicked shuttlecocks at the alley mouth. The moment they saw me, they scattered. Someone had chalked a crude crow onto our clay wall, calling our home a den of corpses. I crouched and did not dare answer. My father would come back from a day's work and pull half a steamed bun from his cloth sack to press into my hand. He told me our trade speaks justice for the dead. The living may dislike it, but someone still has to do the work. The village schoolmaster would not enroll me, saying a coroner's son brought ill omens. So I would crouch outside the window, eavesdrop on the lessons, and trace every character he recited stroke by stroke in the dirt. At 10, I followed my father into the city for the first time on official business. From far off, I saw the yamen plaque above the gate. My father straightened his robe outside, telling me to kneel when I spoke and never lift my eyes. From 14, my father made me memorize the collected cases of injustice rectified. 53 full entries on bone hues, pale and dark, on the age of wounds, fresh or old. By lamp at night, I would recite line by line until dawn. The first time I followed my father to a rural murder scene, I felt sick remembering the pickled greens at home. At the edge of the village, I saw the corner of a white funeral cloth and my legs nearly gave way. I grabbed a clay wall to steady myself. My father knelt before the white cloth and brought out his bamboo ruler and wooden tags, measuring with a gentleness I rarely saw at home. He said quietly that the only voice the dead have left is ours. On the road back, a fine rain began, and my father did not speak the whole way. I carried that worn-edged manual through the mud, and for the first time I felt the book itself burning in my hands. Matchmakers from neighboring villages would not cross our threshold. My father sent word 3 times asking on my behalf, and was turned back each time. No matter how diligent a coroner's son, they said, a bride who married and could never lift her head. I swallowed the bitterness and poured all of myself into the craft, identifying bone joints and old wounds, distinguishing the color signs of various poisons. Each detail I drilled until I could see it clearly with my eyes shut. My father coughed all through one winter and went the following spring. At the end, he gripped my hand and said only one thing: accept your fate, but do not yield. Speak for others, but never lie for them. After burying my father, I took up the work alone, carrying my wooden tool case through the streets and alleys. The yamen runners shouted for me at all hours, and the shout always carried that same dismissive tone. My first solo case was the sudden death of a dye-house master in the west of the city. His household swore it was a sudden illness, but under his fingernails I caught a faint, unmistakable trace of dark green. I crouched beside the dye vats for an entire day, cross-checking every poison entry in the collected cases. At last I was certain. Heartbreak grass had been added to his tea, and the real killer was someone close to him. On the courtroom floor I knelt and handed my report to the magistrate. The dyer's concubine went pale and collapsed to her knees. The crowd at the back murmured that this young coroner's eyes truly looked through human hearts. When the case closed, the magistrate rewarded me with 2 strings of cash. On my way out, the chief clerk quietly reminded me, reward or no reward, never use the main yamen gate. The side door was the one that fit my station. After several more difficult cases were solved, the wronged families in the city began to call on me in secret, asking that old cases be examined again. Some brought rice and cloth. Others would only kowtow once and turn quickly away. I polished each of my father's tools until they shone, and acquired new bronze tweezers and silver needles of my own. A worn wooden case packed full hung heavier on my back than my father's old shoulder pole ever had on his. An old widow in the south of the city was said to have thrown herself down a well. I climbed into the well and examined the scratches on the stone wall. I concluded she had been pushed in and then struck again from above. The case was overturned. Solving that case uncovered the real culprit. When the prefectural inspector heard of it, he summoned me personally to his study. He told me the court badly needed men versed in the collected cases, and that I should keep sharpening myself. At 30, I asked a matchmaker to speak for me and married the only daughter of an old herbalist on the city outskirts. She did not scorn my base trade. She insisted that speaking truth for the wronged was the cleanest work under heaven. After the wedding, she ordered my casework notes and copied them into bound volumes by character radical. Every night she ground ink while I read aloud. Ginger soup simmered on the stove. For the first time, the coroner's house held warmth. By 40, my name had carried far. The prefect named me to assist on a string of linked killings. 7 silk merchants had died inside the city walls in only 3 months, and the streets were already thick with rumor. I laid out the evidence from all 7 cases in a row, comparing them point by point, from fingernail color to the creases along each robe. At last, on the sole of the 6th victim's shoe, I found one same kind of dye house mud. Following that thread, I traced the killings to a remote dyeing workshop. Constables surrounded it through the night and seized bloodstained silk cords and an account book. 7 lives, all taken by the same rival faction within the silk trade. On the day of the verdict, the courtroom was packed. The prefect had me stand at the foot of the steps and read the final report aloud. As I spoke each character, the wronged families collapsed to the floor in tears. After the case closed, the townspeople erected a wooden tablet in the alley with 4 characters carved into it: "Speak for the dead." One night, I walked past alone, slipped behind the tablet, ran a hand over the grain of the wood, and dared not linger. The prefect petitioned the court to grant me an official post. The reply came back refusing. A coroner's merit could be commended, but enrollment in the official register would offend the standing of the literati. 100 taels of silver were sent instead. I took those 100 taels home and gave half to a charity hall outside the city for the burial of nameless corpses. My wife asked no questions and quietly stowed the other half inside a wooden box under our bed. Once my name carried, neighboring prefectures began to send for me. I spent more than half of each year on the road. My wife sent word through a traveler that the well water at home had turned bitter again of late. On those long journeys, I learned to seal evidence with wax, and I refined the bamboo measuring rule for wounds so its markings were finer. Younger men in the trade began appearing at my door asking to be taken on as students. I accepted them. My students bowed and asked how I endured the coldness of strangers all those years. I answered with a single line: "The dead cannot speak, cannot move. If I too take one step back, then who is left in this world to speak for them?" Late one autumn, I was called to the death of a wealthy household, the only son of the prefectural inspector. On the surface, he had fallen drunk into a well at night, and the family pressed me hard to close the case at once. I examined the body closely and found an old scar on the back of the neck that could not have come from a fall. Inside the fingernails was a strand of silk thread. He had been strangled from behind and only then dropped into the well. That night, the inspector sent his steward to my door. A single ingot of gold was placed on the table in exchange for a rewritten report. I pushed the gold back across the table and said only that a report cannot be exchanged, and a life can only be examined once. 3 days later, constables came to ransack my home, claiming I was hiding forbidden medicines. My wife was shoved aside and fell in the courtyard. My students scattered in every direction. Overnight, not a soul was left at the gate. I was held in the prefectural jail for half a month and questioned in court again and again about whether I had fabricated the report. I changed not a single word. I said only that the 37th entry of the collected cases set out the matter plainly. The case in the end was let to fade. I was stripped of my appointment and sent back to my home village. The day I walked out of the jail, my wife was waiting outside the city gate, and even her temple hair had begun to silver. After returning home, no more yamen runners came knocking. The wronged families who once brought me rice now avoided meeting my eyes. They said that this time I had offended a household even the lord of the underworld would not cross. I polished the tool case again and set it on the table, and waited an entire year. No one came to knock. My wife quietly brewed her medicines, and the ginger soup on the stove no longer found anyone with the heart to drink it. Grief took root in her, and that winter she fell ill and never rose again. At the end, she held my hand and said she did not regret marrying me in this life. She only hoped that in the next life I might find a quieter way to live. After burying my wife, our children married into distant towns, and even at the festivals letters were few. I was left alone in the old house. When the stove grew cold, I would gnaw on a dry biscuit with a cup of cold water and call it a meal. Now and then a wronged family from a distant village would knock at my door deep in the night, saying they had heard of the coroner once called divine, begging me to look once more at the body of someone wrongly accused. I would throw on a robe and open the door. I never once refused. My tools were worn down. I polished each piece anew and followed the stranger across mountain paths and abandoned villages. After examining a case, I would take no silver, asking only for a bowl of hot soup and one night of thin bedding. Old friends from the city would now and then send word that no one at the prefecture remembered that wealthy household killing anymore. I folded the letter into a small square and tucked it between the pages of the collected cases as a marginal note. Seeing me grown old and still alone, the neighbors said behind my back that a coroner remains a coroner, and even at the grave he wins no scrap of dignity. I heard them, and only smiled, and gave no reply. In my last years I sit alone by the paper window, a single lamp on the desk, a worn-edged copy of the collected cases of injustice rectified on my lap. Outside, the lanterns of the northern Song City burn on as if they had never once been lit for any of us.